everyone. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me today I have
Albena Yaneva. I'm a professor of architectural theory at the University of Manchester.
And you wrote a book, which is coming out, I believe, in 2023 called Architecture After COVID. My first question is, what prompted you to write this book in the first place, other than the obvious pandemic we're all going through?
Yeah, well, thank you. That's a good question indeed. Well, the first reason for writing was this book was the fact that COVID-19 invaded so aggressively our homes, our urban space, and our architectural studios, and started affecting the day-to-day reality of architecture making, of architectural routines, of epistemic habits. And the book, in a way, accounts for all those changes, unprecedented changes in urban life and in architectural practice as well. And as a social scientist, I was quite intrigued by the power of this virus in social life, and also the way the virus started transforming cities and started changing the patterns of social life and the urban dynamics at the same time related to social connections, and as well the way we were thinking about architecture and urban design. So all these changes were in a way interrelated, and I just wanted to trace this transformation to be able to understand them better, to account them better. We also, in a way, witnessed a number of spatial changes, material transformations, new technologies also populating our cities. We have witnessed perspex and plexiglass replacing wood and concrete. We have witnessed a number of new digital technologies also populating our cities. And this was fascinating change to follow as well. But more importantly, we witness how the virus, as a kind of powerful non-human actor, started transforming our social connections, and started in a way also changing the way we think of social life. So all these changes were extremely interesting to follow and account, and I wanted to document them from the point of view of social changes in society that also affected design practice and life in cities.
And one of the terms you used, I think you might have touched on this with the plexiglass, and those other changes, is I'm going to try to say this right, the laboratorization of space. So maybe you could explain what that means.
Yeah, I use this term because we have seen that a lot of protocols and a lot of tactics and very specific practices that come from laboratories, from scientific laboratories or from medical diagnosis, started migrating into the city. So I'm referring to practices like disinfecting and social distancing, which are usually associated to hospitals, or wearing masks and temperature measuring devices, and quarantining techniques and protocols usually associated to medical diagnosis and hospitals. So all these kind of protocols started migrating into the city and started shaping urban practices, and that's a phenomenon I call laboratorization. We also have seen how this laboratorization in a way transformed different typologies from the kind of typologies that we all know, like museums and galleries, to office spaces, libraries, universities, and in this typologies, the different building types were turned into massive settings for capturing the virus, settings that were designed with the virus in mind. And this entirely changed the choreography of urban life. I also use the term laboratorization because in this laboratory settings that were erected everywhere, in parking lots, in sports venues, in stadia, and in museums to capture the virus. So all these kind of dispositives, these huge settings that aim to capture the virus, also played according to laboratory kind of rules. Their purpose was to weaken the virus, to in a way change the balance of forces, to make humans more powerful than the virus, and so that we can control this virus, the spread of the virus. So this laboratory phenomena was there in urban life, and many other changes were related to this laboratorization. For instance, we have seen new social practices, new pictograms, the visual language in cities change, the posting systems change, new technologies and new materials emerged, and they all began to shape the pandemic city, all these kind of the contactless technologies that we are now so used to have in cities, the temperature measuring devices that we have everywhere, the transparent dividers and walls, the disinfecting machines, all the technologies for counting and measuring bodies in space, they're everywhere, and they force us to engage in sanitizing and social distancing rituals, which changed also the rhythm, the social rhythm of the pandemic city. And that's what I call a laboratorization of urban space.
I remember at the very beginning and sort of in the middle of the pandemic, at least here in Vancouver, storefronts would be like a desk in front of the door so that they would just go in and get stuff for you. And this was all kind of ad hoc. Restaurants, they would close off certain parts, and it was all everyone's kind of up to their own to figure this out. But I would assume that as time goes on, design practices will be formalized and there'll be future developments in terms of design. So we're going to have another pandemic at some point. What do you think are some of the practices we're already putting in place that will be sort of easier to slot in next time this happens?
Well, there will be certainly a lot of thinking about these practices, about social distancing, perhaps a lot of thinking about the innovations that were made during this pandemic, but also in previous pandemics. If we think about the previous pandemics like SARS in 2003, for instance, and all the kind of innovations that followed after SARS. For instance, the humanized building in Hong Kong and the modular integrated construction practices. All these kind of innovations were very much related to SARS. And now there's more and more awareness to the microbiology of indoor spaces and to what viruses do to buildings and how they change environments. So this awareness is, of course, gradually resulting to kind of new thinking about design and architecture, and we're evaluating very carefully all these kind of techniques and the kind of solutions we need to implement to be able to design according to different micro-environmental factors. There is definitely an increased awareness of how building design and special characteristics have an impact on the spread of viruses, and much more specific awareness about the environment created by buildings and the resulting microbiology of indoor spaces that we had before. And I'm pretty sure that this is guiding now designers and planners in taking decisions on the future of buildings. Of course, the awareness about air circulation, open space design, greenery, the space for distancing is pretty much there in every single design decision at the moment. And the this laboratorization I was talking about also in a way emerged in response to this acute awareness that the virus had a special expression and could eventually be controlled with special measures. So these two phenomena are, of course, related, and therefore this awareness is now resulting into new measures and will inevitably lead to new innovations at technological and design level.
Okay. What are some fundamental societal practices that are now up for questioning given COVID-19? Like, for instance, I think you're doing this from home. I'm certainly doing this from home, and most of the world's been doing their work from home for the past 2 years, but that's just one facet. What are some things that you think architecture is going to have to account for going forward in terms of people are working from home, people have to behave in different ways?
Yeah, this is definitely happening, but it's not, I would say it's not a very new phenomenon for the architectural sector, for the built environment sector, broadly speaking, especially for international practices. They have been operating through some of those platforms, Zoom and Teams, but maybe these platforms were not kind of fully integrated into their working routines. Of course, the pandemic had allowed them to develop and implement some of these tools much more widely in the practice. It also prompted other technological developments. A lot of practices implemented new tools for project management, new software that like BIM, for instance, which was, of course, very much known to the profession since the so-called second digital turn around 2000, but was simply not implemented by many practices around the world for different reasons, of course. And now the pandemic just provided an opportunity for those practices to slow down, perhaps look around for software that is available and start implementing it more widely into their working routines. So these are, I would say, small changes. I wouldn't talk about big changes, revolutionary changes, because a lot of critics were tempted to talk about big turns, big revolutions. I would call them small changes, minimal changes in practice, but they certainly changed the equilibrium in practice, in architectural practices, and in particular in small scale practices, as they were much more affected by the pandemic, I would say, than the large scale practices that we have, star architect practices, which were less affected by those changes.
Now, in the book, you mentioned the pandemic made people appreciate their local environment, their local built environment, but their environment generally. Could you elaborate on that?
I think we all witness how important our neighborhood and local environment is, and we started appreciating much more our visits to the local shops, to the local park. We began to know our neighbors better than we knew them before, and we, in a way, rediscovered this kind of closeness and compact neighborhood life that we didn't appreciate perhaps before. And we also witnessed in urban planning a lot of scholars talking about the 15-minute city, the 20-minute city. So there were different chrono versions of this concept. And the fact that you can discover your neighborhood or your city basically in 15 minutes, and that everything could be very compact and located at a close distance. And this concept was there before the pandemic. I wouldn't say it's a new concept. It was there since perhaps 2016 with the writings of Carlos Moreno, and it was in a way a thinking pretty much developed in response to the climate crisis, thinking promoting green initiatives at the neighborhood level and reducing travel. But now it became much more relevant to the current context. The fact that we are promoting a version of city life where everything is at a minimal travel distance, and we can easily connect housing facilities, offices, restaurants, park, hospitals, and cultural venues. And the city is in a way reduced to the neighborhood due to this closeness. So the global pandemic in a way accelerated this trend of chrono-urbanism, of thinking through the localization, this kind of localization concepts, and also place the emphasis on density, proximity, diversity, and digitalization. And a lot of scholars in urban studies also were very quick to announce the end of the big city because of this focus on the local neighborhood, on the kind of local environment that you can discover in a neighborhood. Yeah, whether they were right or not, we cannot say at this stage.
I was going to ask, the death of the city in air quotes. Do you think that's exaggerated? People did move to the country, but then you get articles about people who are regretting moving a year later. So how does this, not that you should have the answer to this, but how does this all play out?
Yeah, you're right. Some people decided to move out of the big city. Others deliberately stayed and changed their style of life. There were different responses indeed. I would say perhaps these statements about the death of the city are a little bit exaggerated because indeed cities were empty during the lockdowns, but now we can see them repopulated again especially by the younger generation, by younger professionals who are moving to cities and again flocking to cities because of their cultural attraction, and we have because the younger generation in particular, they can have their cities are vital for their social and professional networks in particular. And yes, indeed, some urban theories did claim that this statement of the end of the city was perhaps exaggerated or premature. And there was a lot of speculation whether cities will bounce back after the pandemic, as they have also done in the past in situations of crisis, or this will be a phenomenon that will endure. I think it's too early to say and to speculate on how the pandemic will affect city life. Perhaps we can argue, we can see these changes much better in a couple of years from now, as every city at the moment is reacting in a different way to this post-pandemic climate.
Okay, and finally, when and where will people be able to see your book?
Oh, the book will be out in January 2023, and the publisher is Bloomsbury.
Okay, great.